are 70,000 square feet of space. We're coaching, we are education, we're connections to mentors and experts. And here today is our eKickStart session. This is our educational program that we offer to you every second Friday of the month. And we welcome you again. We took a pause last month for Startup Week, and we're very happy to have you back. Just a little housekeeping items. The restrooms are on the hallway to the left. We have some donuts, water, and coffee if you would like. And we have an amazing speaker today. We do this program in partnership with our friends Queen City Angels, and we are very happy to have them here and to have our guests invited by Queen City Angels. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'm Scott Jacobs, Executive Director of Queen City Angels. About in the year 2005, I was in transition and I was trying to decide what I was going to do next. And I started to do a lot of networking. And in my networking, I really well-connected guys said there's two people you got to meet. You got to meet Jim Mason, who's the CEO at Beach Acres Parenting Center, and Mark Faust. So I got a chance to meet Mark Faust. He's been consulting almost 30 years now. He's a young man, so he must have started when he was about 18 years old. And he urged me to read a book, How to Get Started at Consulting, which I did. And that was the basis for me starting my own marketing consulting practice beginning in 2006. And since he does sales consulting, I thought that was a pretty good fit. So I've consulted and worked with Mark for many, many years. I could call him a good friend. He's a phenomenal consultant, and you'll really enjoy his presentation today. So let me introduce Mark.
Thanks, Scott. 8 hours ago. Does anybody know where Bell Fountain, Ohio is? It's up there, isn't it? Well, 8 hours ago, I'm sitting at the bar of the Iron Horse Inn, having a Guinness. And I made it back just in time to get here. Seriously, we were. There was a speech up there. A friend wanted to go. It started at 7 o'clock. We didn't leave that till 9. Met some people afterwards. But excited to be here and in talking with some of you. I found out that even though you're, in your case, helping to retain customers at health workout centers and the Ys, etc., you're also really consultants. So apropos to what Scott was saying when he broke into consulting, he's still in consulting. A lot of us are still, really, if you look at it, we help grow business. Now others of us work in the consumer world and so forth. So I'm throwing in some extra stuff that might not be in the slides, but I want you to think for the next minute or two as I tell a story. What is your biggest growth challenge, your sales or marketing challenge, constraint, issue, that if you could break through could really take you to the next level? My promise to you is I'd like to give every one of you an inspiration for 3 new ideas, of which you'll implement 1 or 2 over the next 3 months. I found, and one of the inspirations for my one of my new books this year, High Growth Levers, there's usually a handful, just usually 3 or 4, 5 growth levers that if you improve those things in any company of any size, Fortune 500 divisions that are billions or a new 7-figure startup, that you can greatly accelerate the growth of a company. My colleague back there, Tom Kaiser, was just working on a project this year where it was just a couple of things with the sales team that literally led to 1,000% increase in their productivity and ultimately 7-figure immediate and ultimately, probably 8-figure impact over the next few years. And so what are those things that are the biggest constraints? Because right behind every constraint is usually where you're going to find innovation. So I want to open up with a story of something that happened about 6 years ago. And I was down in Pocahontas, Arkansas, and just getting ready to leave after visiting for a few days, pull into the gas station, and that proverbial old guy sitting at the table there goes, "You're not from around here, are you?" And I go, "No, is that a good thing or a bad thing?" He says, "Well, it depends." I was like, "Okay." He says, "What are you doing in town?" I said, "Well, my uncle Bobby Fromberger just passed away, and my mom and I were just cleaning up the estate." And he goes, "Fromberger, you mean like George?" And I go, yeah, that's his dad. Or his brother, George Promberg. And he goes, no, it wouldn't be that one. It'd be much older. I go, well, that's his dad too. And his dad was named George. And he goes, well, let me tell you a story about George Promberg. If you were a little 5-year-old kid walking down the street with another kid who didn't have a pair of shoes back in 1932, he was the kind of guy who'd come up to you, give you a $5 bill and say, could you go over that cross the street to that shoe store, that new shoe store, and help them out? They're not selling enough shoes. If you could both get a pair of shoes for yourselves, but don't tell anybody who gave you that money. Well, that was my grandfather, the last story I heard. You know, and he died in 1941, and they're still talking about him. He was the owner of Pocahontas Hardware, an ag retailer, John Deere dealership. But imagine that, a company that made that kind of impression that people are still talking about them today. All of your companies have another responsibility beyond just making money and growing the customers that you're working with. It's to have an impact, a raison d'etre. And one of the themes of my new book, High Growth Levers, in the cultural side of it, you know, back to this strategy, innovation, and culture, is if you really want to hit the accelerant on the culture side, you've got to identify your higher purpose, your raison d'etre. What is it that fuels, and you know, one of my favorite examples is we're all familiar with 5-Hour Energy. The guy's worth like $5 billion. He's giving 98% of his wealth away before he turns 70 or something like that. And what's he doing with that investment back into what's his rate? It's to find alternative sources of water and energy, kind of like the product, a drink that you drink, and energy for the poorest in the world. And he's actually making amazing breakthroughs. So when he goes, or his salesmen are out there trying to get that extra shelf space, it's not that hard for them to get it when they tell that story. So what's your raison d'etre, your higher purpose? I want to ask you about, and the stuff we're going to talk about. Yes, I've worked with some big companies, and it's through these experiences, but also the experiences of a lot of small companies. I've worked with over 4 dozen third-generation family-owned companies, and some of the best stuff comes from there. And it's led into these insights in these 3 different areas. But I want to ask you, what are your top constraints? And just spit out a few things. What was it you said, Doug?
It's just actually getting appointments.
Setting appointments. We're going to talk about that. Don't have the slide, but a few things will get you more appointments. What's another top constraint you guys might have?
Return calls, return emails.
Getting people to follow up with you when you leave a message. Okay, what else? Anybody else want to share?
Finding customers.
Finding customers. Excellent. Okay, let's write that one down. Anything else over here?
Market segmentation.
What's that? Market segmentation. Kind of ties into the finding customers.
Building an active pipeline.
Building an active pipeline.
Brand awareness.
Brand awareness. Okay.
Length of the sales cycle.
Length of the sales cycle. We're going to knock all these out. Let me start with market segmentation and finding customers. The work of prospecting and identifying targets. I'll talk about the 3 20s here in a little bit, but you should be time blocking that work. That top of the funnel work is one of the most important things almost all companies, smaller companies especially when you don't have a marketing division, a marketing department, a full-time marketing person doing that for you. It's something you've got to do as the C-level or the sales front for your organization. But we'll talk about some tools to prioritize those and so forth. On setting appointments, since I don't have a slide in here on it, I'll just give you 3 things that will help you set more appointments. The 3 things that keep you out from setting appointments are you talk too much, you lack confidence, and you're a nobody who nobody sent. And that's actually based on a lot of research. People like organizations like Northwestern Mutual have literally spent tens of millions of dollars researching how to set more appointments. It's core to their business. But think about what the flip of those things are. To flip those over, the opposite is you say just enough when you're making that initial call, when your objective is to set that appointment. You speak confidently, but I'll tell you exactly how to sound to make it really confident. And you always have a connection. So let's go through those. Saying just enough means you've got about 30 seconds to get to the point and ask for that appointment. If you're going over that, if you're trying to explain what you do, if you are getting into too much detail, your odds of setting an appointment after 30 seconds go down exponentially with every 5 or 10 seconds. So keep it very brief. Secondly, well, let me jump to the third one, always having a connection. Ideally, you've got a referral. Somebody has looked at a list, your 320s, and said, oh yeah, I used to work there, I know so-and-so, that's the guy you should call, and you reference that name. That's the ideal connection. If you don't have a connection, you've got to manufacture one, a legitimate, ethical connection of some sort. Basic little research. Hey, we're working with companies just like yours right down the street. You might know of such and such. But while I'm down there, I just love to stop by, shake hands, chat a little bit about the type of work we do, and hear about some of your top challenges. Would you have a few minutes sometime next week? Now, that was very short and sweet. Did you notice a few things I said? One of the things I said was shake hands. Now, that's comfortable for me to say. It may not be for you, but for most people, you can say shake hands. And what Northwestern Mutual found out is if you use those two words, your odds of setting an appointment go up by like 17, 20%. So I use those words all the time. I used to have a really high, still do, appointment setting. I set appointments in front of my clients a lot of times with a tool called Phone Burner. I would recommend you go to phoneburner.com down and subscribe. It will dial the phone for you, it will leave voicemails for you, and you will quadruple your phone appointment productivity. Absolutely. Quadruple. I set 3 appointments in 15 minutes with a team where they average 1.5 appointments per week per sales guy. Pretty abysmal, right? The other thing about staying adult and setting appointments is the adult tonality. There's 3 different voice tones you can have. You can either be parental. Lance, I'd like to stop by and shake hands with you, and talk a little bit. Would you be open either Monday or Tuesday? What would be best for you? And kind of telling him, and that dominant sound. No, that's 1970s style. The adult tonality is peer-to-peer collegial sound in your voice, but it's the opposite of the child tonality, which a lot of us fall into when we start to lose our confidence. How does your voice sound when you start to lose your confidence? When you ask a question, I would like to stop by, shake hands. Would you have a few minutes sometime next week? Going up at the end of the sentences. So the opposite of going up at the end of the sentence is going down at the end of the sentence. In fact, just think of the media when they're reading the news to you, whether it's on the radio or on TV. Those guys are trained to have the adult tonality and to always go down at the end of the sentences, right? Listen to any of the guys reading the media, reading the news in the media, they're always going down at the end of the sentences. Okay, so there's a few ideas to help you set some more appointments. Even if you're brand new, ideally you've got some existing customers. And if you don't have any existing paying customers, go do beta testing. I mean, that's a concept in startups of just, we're doing research, could we just work, it won't charge you a thing, and it's a way to sell. It's to sell by just giving it away and doing some sampling or testing or surveying or whatever it may be. But in doing that and having some sort of customer or quasi-customer relationships out there, let me ask you this question. How much untapped potential lies within your existing customer relationships? For most going concerns, it's significant. Many companies could double just with their existing customers. Doug, do you have a lot of customers already? Yeah. How much untapped potential, percent-wise, lies with your existing customers?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And just even from referrals alone, I suspect there's probably a lot, because they think they probably don't know each other.
There you go. And referrals alone. So here's the point. An aspect of strategy that came up over 50 years ago from Peter Drucker there. A required aspect of strategy is to conduct depth interviews with your customers on a regular quarterly basis as a means to fueling your innovation. But here's what I found. When I was 24 years old, when I started Echelon Management after a few years of consulting with another small consulting firm, one of the only ways I could stand in front of a bunch of gray hairs and have some credibility was to interview their customers. So that's how I sold. Hey, Drucker says, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, sure, talk to a few, give us some feedback. What I found immediately was that there was a tremendous amount of untapped growth potential within most organizations with their existing customer relationships. In fact, I can't recall working with a $20 million or larger company and interviewing a cadre, a dozen or so, and not finding 7 figures of growth potential. I've worked with a $500 million company up the road, Intech, if you remember those guys, sold hardware, et cetera. Interviewed 80 of their customers. We found $280 million of growth potential if these guys would start offering IT consulting. They already did. Their customers didn't even know. They realized 180 million of that over the next year. So how much untapped potential lies? Are you implementing the basic required aspects of strategy, depth interviews being one of them? So that can be a gold mine, but they will also tell you what they like, dislike, what it'll take to sell more. And you should ask the question, what would it take for you to fire me? You want to know about how secure you are in those relationships? I am shocked at how many companies out there might have more than 20% of their business with a single customer or something like that. And they don't really know how secure they are with those most important of relationships. You should be going out there and taking a pulse as the CEO or the leader, or having a third party do it. You could have your CPA do it. But that is what I do, and is one of my key products. And I find it is extremely valuable. You're crazy if you don't do it. Let's shift into selling and influence, and how you can increase your effectiveness, close more, and shorten the sales cycle. The first aspect I want to go into is what it would take to deepen the level of rapport. Because we're going to, after this slide here, look at a questioning model that will help you get people to more quickly decide that you're the clear, obvious choice. But to be more effective with your questions, you need good rapport. You need a trust and credibility, a likability with people that takes it to a little bit deeper level. So how do you deepen rapport? I'll just tell you 2 stories to illustrate the point of how not to do it, where I screwed up. So the first appointment I had one morning in Mount Adams was with a guy named David Adair, Vice President of Business Sales at Apple Computer. And I'm knocking on the door at the 3rd floor of that Baldwin building down there, and nobody's answering. And it's about 6:44, and I got my 15-minute rule. We're getting ready to bolt, and I'm knocking one last time. And way down the hall, I see behind the glass a guy walking like this. I forgot about him. And he comes back, he's, Faust, totally forgot it. Oh, God, I'm so sorry. I come back to my office, and we go back to this big, beautiful white office that you can write on any part of the walls, and the 2 windows looking out over downtown Cincinnati. And this guy literally got this close to my face. But he also talked about this loud because he was from New Jersey, a family of 9, and he was just very animated, right? A visual communicator is what he was. Now, how did I communicate? Right back there with him. David, yeah, exactly. He said, you got to give me a picture. Paint the picture. How's this stretch 100 thing roll out? What's it look like? How am I going to describe it to my guys? Yada, yada, yada. And I'm right there, this is this. We do this here in 100 days, and we prep to talk to your customers, and yada, yada, yada. Oh, it looks great, Mark. I get it. Did I close the deal? Damn right I did. I closed that deal. Then right down the street, I have an appointment with a guy named David Losi, who worked at Lincoln Financial. He was the GA, the manager of the office. And I go to meet Dave, and here's how he greets me. Mark, so good to have you here at the office. Come back to my he's talking in a whisper. We go into this dark wood-paneled room with the rich, luxurious leather seats, and he leans back and he pulls one of these. So, Mark, if you could help me get my arms around this process, stretch 100. What's that really mean? What are the steps? Got to get a better feel for this thing. So he was the classic kinesthetic communicator. Of course, how did I respond? Like an idiot, because I was so full of enthusiasm, acting like Zig Ziglar, super excited, and going, oh, yeah, and was I matching him getting rapport? Heck no. And I met this guy just a couple weeks before, and we clicked. But he was in a visual state, coming off of a stage with a speech, and yada, yada. And so I literally took my foot like I was hitting the brakes, went down like that, pulled the same thing, went back like this, took the deep breath. It was painful. David, help me get my arms around your objectives. What is it you really believe is the potential of your team? And so I started to talk, and all of a sudden, finally, we got back, and we had some rapport, and we got the deal. But how painful it was to adapt to his style, which was not in my mode right then at that point. And so, what's really happening when you do that right? You're totally focused on the other person. You're looking them right in the eye. You're connecting to the face, even the physiology of how they're sitting, the sound of the voice. In fact, it's the focus acronym. First of all, how do they feel? Some people, I've been in meetings where they were like just so de-energized. I had to ask them, scale of 1 to 10, what's your energy level? I'll never forget Greg Gillett, one of the commercial real estate managers here in town, threw down his pen and he's like, damn it, Mark, I was up till 4 last night doing my books, and I am beat. And all of a sudden, his energy level went to like a 9 for the rest of the meeting because we called it out. But what is that feeling you're seeing? Are they angry? Are they frustrated? Are they distracted? What is it? Call it out. Observe the physiology, match their physiology, move like they do a bit if you're comfortable with that. But most importantly, connect to their voice. How fast, how loud are they speaking? What kind of words are they using? Can you use some of the same words and synonyms? Rephrasing what people say, saying it better than they say it themselves. Even when they're giving you objections or reason why they might leave you or what they don't like, rephrasing it better than they do is one of the great rapport deepening tactics that you can employ at any moment. But ultimately, you're syncing your style to theirs. So if you're in rapport, you can move ahead and get into the questioning phase. Go ahead.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So, men talking to women, women talking to men.
Yes. Just don't do it.
But, you know, different styles, men matching to, is there a thought on that subject?
So my wife was in this kinesthetic mode because she was sad, crying. And, you know, so she's talking slower and she's literally standing like this. And I said, Julie, you got to try something here. Just stand up straight and look at the ceiling. And all of a sudden she stopped crying. She got in a different state of mind. I go, did you notice what just happened there, Julie? You totally changed your attitude. Wow, that really worked. But it didn't solve my problem. She had to go back into the line. Now, the point being is think about when you've been in rapport with somebody of the opposite sex, and I'm not talking like highly attractive rapport, just respect, mutual, collegial rapport. What's happening? If you observe what's happening, I mean, first of all, eye contact is powerful. Just looking at somebody and holding it, you know, it deepens rapport. You can do that with anybody. If you're too loud, especially with women or somebody who's shorter, or you get too close to somebody like David Dare. I mean, people were intimidated by that guy because of the way his proxemics were not sensitive. He wasn't sensitive to proxemics. But if you got right back into his face, you kind of respected it. Well, I mean, do you see women doing that to you? No. So you got to, where's their proxemic comfort range? You just got, the bottom line word is focus. The more intently you focus on anybody in this room, the more instantly you can start to connect and see and how they're communicating to you subconsciously, and you naturally will adapt your style to that. So I think it absolutely applies to anybody, and even in different, I've even had people who, talking about this, who were mute and deaf mutes that would describe in sign through their, that they have, this relates to them too, that they can even have volume when they're deaf. They can see volume. How about that? That shocked me at the Veterans Administration.
So what happens if you have two people trying to do this at the same time?
It's really deep rapport. Like, babies are made. Okay, so let's go through a questioning formula here. You might want to get a piece of paper or type in FOCUS for this acronym I'm about to walk through, the focus questioning formula, which I do detail in my first book, Growth for Boston, page 181. But the point is this, is that there are 5 different types of questions that get 5 different types of emotional responses. And the best consultants, which again, most of us are really, in a way, consultants, advisors to help other organizations grow, individuals grow, But the best consultants, negotiators, and leaders get really good at 2 of these questions, and the vast majority of people are not that good at 2 of these types of questions. So the first question is what we're all most frequently asking, and those are fact questions. Fact questions get a neutral emotional response. The ho-hum you see there on the left side. That's a fact question's emotional response. Now, there are some fact questions you have to ask. Well, who are you using now? How long have you been working with them? How's that been working out? How do you make decisions here? Who all's involved in the decision making? Those are all very important fact questions. But the fact is about fact questions, if you ask too many, you burn people out. So you have to be very parsimonious with which ones you prioritize, which ones you're going to use. That's why creating a questioning vocabulary, write that down, questioning vocabulary is one of, frequently, the top 3 sales improvement tools of any organization. What is your questioning vocabulary? Usually there's a handful of 10 to 25 questions that are the most important, powerful questions. But they move from the fact to these other areas. The next area is opportunity questions. You could call them objective questions sometimes, but I call them opportunity questions because sometimes opportunity questions elicit a pain, a problem, an issue, a constraint, like I asked of you at the beginning. Other times they elicit a positive outcome, a vision, a hope, a dream. But only about 20-some-odd% of people think in that more visionary, positive aspect when they make decisions. Most people make decisions based on moving away from pain, preventing or solving a pain. So you've got to ask those questions. What's your biggest issue? What's your biggest challenge? What are your top constraints? What if what's the magic wand? If I could solve 3 things, what would those top 3? One of the worst questions to ask is what keeps you up at night? All right? And there's much better ways to phrase that now. It's so cliched and trite. That's why you write these down, so you can rephrase them, make them more colloquial or conversational and not so intrusive as some of them are going to be, especially the next type of question. The consequence or cost question, the C of focus, the one in the middle where you see him screaming, you're pinching the pain there. So you told me that your challenge is with your long sales cycle. Well, tell me about that. What's that really cost you? How much more could you grow if, well, that jumps to the next question, but what's that really cost you? How's that feel? I mean, how frustrating, how often does that happen? How, and on and on, and quantify, and that's a key thing here. QVing is questioning vocabulary and quantification of value, QVing. You want to always quantify the negative dollars and the positive dollars. The C question is the negative dollarization of the problem. The more you ask that question, the more you're going to motivate that slow decision maker to make a decision. There's a very famous name here in town that was losing millions of dollars a year in one facet of their business. It's something you eat, and it's sweet. And one facet of their business was just bleeding money. And so as they rescheduled a meeting, I asked them, so how many hundreds of thousands of dollars will we lose between now and then by putting off this decision? And you could just see these guys wince in pain. But that's the type of thing sometimes you have to do. Carefully, diplomatically, not insulting them. So, consequence questions. The next question is upside or understanding of value questions. So those are questions that are going to find out what's the positive outcomes that are going to happen if they make the decision that you're going to recommend or you're moving them toward. And so you ask, just how much could you grow if you could shorten your sales cycle to a third of what it is now? How much would that be worth to you? How many more dollars a quarter would you bring in? How many more people could you see, and what would that result in? And there could be a multiple of various benefits and upsides that once you add them all up, could be a lot more significant than just the one area or the binary consideration that they're looking at. So those 2 questions, the consequence and upside questions, are the 2 areas of questions that we least ask, and yet they're the most important in regards to accelerating the time of making a decision, shortening the time of decision making. If you ask the negative dollar, the positive dollar, if you write it down in their words, you are getting the most important fuel in the next tool that we'll talk about that is going to help them make the right decision. And then finally, rather than closing, the final smiley face there, it's a solution step question. The S is the solution step question. So that is a question like, it might not even be all question as part statement, but typically with our best clients that we've onboarded, we've done it over 3 phases that have taken about 30 days. We send out the engineering team initially and do the assessment. We clarify these numbers you've estimated as to what you could make, save, and prevent and bleed. But ultimately, we can do the implementation within 45 days if this all happens next. But that's the next 3 steps would be on. But you tell me what would be the best timing for you, and how should we set up the decision-making or evaluation process. And so usually throwing it back Socratically in their lap is the best way, because if you want to shorten sales cycles, you do 2 things. You never leave an appointment, a conversation, or a phone call without setting the next appointment. If you do that one thing, it was one of the reasons that SAP and the predecessors of Salesforce.com were set up. It was literally to shorten sales cycles, because for every week, some of these 8-figure products that Oracle and SAP and IBM sold, they lost millions for a week delay. And so setting that next appointment was not, you weren't paid if you didn't fill that aspect out in your call report. The other thing that will shorten sales cycles has to do with Socratically having them set up what that time should be. Rather than you saying, hey, let's get back together next week, ask them, when's the best time for us to get back together? Really, I'd rather you come back tomorrow because I'm going on vacation, yada, yada, whatever. They usually accelerate the sales cycle if you let them, if you ask them. The majority of the time. We've tested this and it works. So those are another couple of things that will shorten sales cycles for you. Before I talk about focused partnering plans, or you could also call this innovations on your proposals, which will help you close bigger deals, the higher dollar deals, and shorten sales cycles as well. Let me throw out a concept here that a couple of you inspired me to throw out there. But Jay Abraham has written several books, and he's a marketing guru. He's the guy who saved, what was that oxy, the thing you rub on your on arthritis and makes you feel better. He got a deal where he got all free advertising for about a year or 2 back on. What's it? Yeah, so one of those type of things. It was back in the 80s that this happened, early 80s, late 70s. And the bottom line is he gave away the product. It was, and he gave, sold it at absolute minimum. He gave the TV stations all the money from the first sale. And he said, rather than charging us for advertising, we'll give you 100% of the first sale. Because 70% of everybody re-upped and got on an automatic ship. And so they made loads, and that company just multiplied 20-fold in its value. But one of the things he talks about a lot is risk reversal. Risk reversal. What is the way in which you reverse risk for your prospective clients? And you might need a couple of different options here. So in listening to some of the things you do, you sell a bookkeeping software, and yet some people are not early adapters. And so how can you reverse risk for them? What's the free trial? What's the way in which to get started, in which it's a non sequitur, it's a non-decision, it's crazy for them not to at least try it. So the more you can do a risk reversal, usually that's another way to shorten sales cycles, accelerate the decision-making process, etc. So partnering plans. I call my proposals partnering plans. A lot of my clients do after we look at this. And the reason being is you really are entering into a partnership in many business models. You're in a partnership with those health clubs, helping them to really grow their business. And they've got key objectives you're helping them to meet. You're advisors with some unique tools that nobody else has. And so look at it as a partnering plan to measure your progress and success, and it will differentiate you. I'll explain it in a second. So this is an outline, using the acronym of FOCUS again, of how to innovate your proposals. And again, think of the 5 different areas we'll talk about here and how you could make them better and more effective. The problem with most proposals is they open up with a sales pitch about you. And you don't want to do that. You want to focus on the issue. What brought you together? What are the facts of the situation? So that as they read that first paragraph, no more than that is needed in regards to the facts overview, or sometimes I call it the situation summary. They know, wow, he's got it. You know, our sales cycles are too long. It's costing us a lot of money. We want to shorten the sales cycles, etc. We've tried various things. Nothing's worked, yada, yada. Boom. That's a good situation summary. The most important thing to really have them see and impact them, though, is their objectives in their words. There's usually just 1, 2, or 3 max objectives with initializing an engagement, a relationship that are key. We want to shorten sales cycles to increase revenue and, and improve retention, whatever it may be. Clarify, bulletize those top objectives, and that's section 2. The next section, the counts, the metrics, or measures, as I call them sometimes, are how will we know we've been successful at reaching those objectives? Those are metrics or measures of success. And so that's another section that you'll want to bulletize. We will know we've been successful when the following are manifest. That we've seen the reduction of sales cycle times, the increase in ratio of closure with new prospects, et cetera, et cetera. Currently it's at X. After 60 days, we'll take a pulse and see where it is. Or after a quarter or on a quarterly basis, we will measure progress and review accordingly. Upside value. This is the most important and yet the least frequently included facet of proposals. The upside dollarized value they stand to gain by engaging with you and your solution. So over the course of 3 years, I'll bet that a $10 million organization would literally realize 7 figures of increased profit or revenue from engaging with you guys, right? That should be right there in their verbiage with their estimates, their guesses that if we achieve these objectives, this is what it's worth. And that is the area you want to negotiate in a contract or a proposal. When you're negotiating value, you inoculate yourself from price negotiations. Does anybody ever here have price pushback? Pushback on your pricing? No? That doesn't happen? Just with you? Okay. We'll skip over that. So, that's the most important section of your proposals. Get good at the C and the U questions, and you will be able to fill that in. Negotiate the value, and you will inoculate the price negotiations or price pushback. Now, I'll tell you 2 stories here to illustrate the importance of this final facet of proposals. One has to do with Bally, who makes pool tables. And they have pool tables that range in pricing from a few $100s all the way up to $30,000 custom-made artisan works of art pool tables. And of their 200 or so stores around North America, there were a few that were selling pool tables at an average dollar that was quadruple what most of the other stores were at. And so they sent out their secret shoppers to find out what in the world is going on. What are they doing right? And so the guys are out there secret shopping, and they noticed something. When they first walk in, all 3 of them had the same problem. They had the $30,000 pool table right there by the front entrance. So this is against the rules because these expensive works of art are going to get damaged by the sun, by kids, people touching, and it's supposed to be in a back room by appointment only type of thing. This is not where you put the $30,000 Rolls Royce. So they wrote them up for that. They also weren't following the sales conversation outline that was recommended or required. They would ask, what brought you in? That's de rigueur. You always find out, well, what attracted you? But when it came to, I saw the sale on the $2,000 pool table that's, 25% off, they wouldn't go right to that like they were supposed to and show them what they came in to see. Instead, they'd say, that's great, we're going to get to that, but let me take you through our philosophy of how, we line up our offerings and why. Let's start with the $30,000 pool table, or they called it something else. People literally build their homes around this. It's not a lifetime guarantee, it's an eternal relationship. We literally will come and fix and move this as you move, or your generations after you move along. But that is, and this is custom-made artwork. And in Italy, this leather is done in Genoa and by artisans that are literally, have been doing it for over 40 years. And no one pocket is the same of any of these tables ever made. The woodwork, done by craftsmen and the woods from Hawaii and here and there and yada yada, and they really were worth every penny once you got done hearing that. Then they would go to the $15,000 pool tables and the $8,000 pool tables and the $4,000 pool tables, and finally the one you came in for, the cheesy little $2,000 table. But you tell me what would be best for you. But they went through all the options. That's why they were so much more successful. They gave people a choice. So another story comes from one of the greatest sales success stories of all time. You might have heard of her. She was a genius at selling Girl Scout cookies. A little 10-year-old girl was invited into Chicago to speak and explain how she could be the #1 Girl Scout cookie salesperson in the nation, not having a dad of a big company just buy, all the employees buy the cookies. Those were discounted. Had to be door-to-door sales. So how did you do it? And imagine this little girl getting up in front of hundreds of den moms or whatever they're called, and explaining this. She sounded like she was a sales manager. She goes, well, first of all, Mom and I mapped out our territories. We had various neighborhoods that we prioritized with market segmentation. No, she didn't say that, but that's what we're talking about here. And I wanted to hit the best neighborhoods first, the ones where the homes are closest together and, they're a good demographic and more likely to buy, and they've got kids, et cetera, and I can make a bigger sale. So, boom, she prioritized her market segmentation. How many of you have a written priority of all your different markets? Okay, well, this 10-year-old girl did. And then they went out and she had sales productivity nailed. Mom picked me up at school and dropped me off at here, and we would check in every so often and all of that. So sales productivity was at a max. I mean, she was seeing as many doors as she could possibly see. And then the real deal, though, had to do with her proposal. She had created her own custom form, not what the Girl Scouts gave you. She created a form that had a place for each name, a name for each person in the family, up to 10 names if you wanted to throw other people in there. A checklist of various fact questions. She had to check to see if they had a freezer. And ultimately, there was the list of all the different pictures and everything that she'd show of the different cookies. And she had a little check mark for what each person's favorite cookies were. And so she'd write down, Dad's name and the kids' names. And she'd say, yeah, Mrs. Johnson, so what is your husband's favorite, or what are his favorite cookies? Great, got it. And what about Johnny's? And what about Susie's? And fill out. Now you hold on a second, and she would literally take, and she said it felt like an eternity, but as she got it, it didn't matter anymore, but she'd take 30 to 60 seconds to do a little math and figure some things out. And then she'd hand the proposal over to the buyer and say, okay, you'd mentioned you have a freezer, and as you know, we only come around once a year. So what I've created here are 3 options. The gold option is for 12 months. These are all the amounts of each of these cookies that you would need to be happy, keep your family happy for the entire year until I come back next year. Now, if you only want to keep them happy for 6 months, this is the average of how much they'll need for the next 6 months. And if it's only 3 or anything there in between, you tell me, though, what's best for you. And then she'd shut up. And a lot of people would take 3 or 6, and a few even 12 months. That's why she had to have trucks delivering cookies to her house, literally. Now, can you sell as well as a Girl Scout cookie salesperson? Are you going to create options, or are you just going to say, take it or leave it? Is it a choice of yeses or yes-no? Binary decisions cost you money. Options make you money. Don't ever forget that. That one thing has saved many companies and turnarounds. Even at John Deere, they have a division called Nortrax that compete with Caterpillar. And they had about a half dozen locations they were going to shut down. But that approach right there that I walked through with you, along with selling the incremental value their unique and more advantageous equipment had, most of it, not all, some was very equal to Caterpillar's. But giving people options of, do you want us to take over all of your machinery, half of your machinery, or you just want to begin with a half dozen pieces of equipment over the next few months on a test, because we'll take them all back, but we promise you, you will make more money with at least a half dozen. We're not here to sell a single piece. And that saved many jobs, just approaching it that way. And Tim said that they literally, from reading this book as a team, he was the first guy to give me that idea. His executive team read this book together, and he says, literally, Mark, a $17 billion company, you clearly have added the innovation process, $100 million in profit improvement in just the first 6 months, without a doubt, by putting some of these innovations in place. Hundreds of jobs have been created or saved ultimately. But that's what innovation can buy you, if you're focused on innovating. So let's look at sales productivity. By the way, do I have a hard stop time? When do I need to stop? 9. About 9? Okay. So we have this process. We've taken thousands of salespeople through, and we've worked with a few hundred clients since 1990. It's called the Stretch 100. Now, it takes a month or so to get ready for it usually, but it's a 100-day stretch. And the reason we do 100 days is because it's enough time for people to change a behavior or 2 or 3. And the goal is to double, that's another aspect of the 100% increase, the sales productivity of the individuals, maybe even the company. So for example, here at what's now Cushman Wakefield, Doug Bolton, who used to be the publisher of the business newspaper, was fresh into the industry, and he brought 14 of his guys through the Stretch 100. And I'd worked with that company in the industry, for 20 years, so this wasn't new, but these guys go through the process, and at the end of the year, 12 of the 14 literally doubled their 6-figure income. And some of these things we're talking about are what they use to make that happen. So the first one, stretch days and weeks. We did this at John Deere too, where they had literally 1 appointment a week on average in Pembroke, New Hampshire. One of the most abysmal sales productivity groups I've ever seen in my life. I rode with some of these guys for the day. They could make a lunch last 3.5 hours. I was amazed. It was down to an art form, how unproductive they could be. And so we implemented, and they said, there's no way in hell we could do a stretch week. We've got to deliver parts on a day-to-day basis. We can't do it. We couldn't even do a stretch day. And I said, oh, baloney, come on. If one guy does a stretch day and everybody else covers for him, including some people in the end, come on, somebody else can deliver that urgent part somebody needs, and you could be out there stretching for a day. And they eventually negotiated with themselves and did that. How many people do you think they could shake hands with, look in the eye, and have an exchange of information that might lead to a sale in a single day? Remember, they started at 1.3 a week. What do you think they could do in a day? This is in the mountainous regions of Pembroke, New Hampshire. Well, because they did really good market segmentation, they created a list of literally 200 different contacts each. And because they innovated with, at that point it was MapPoint from Microsoft, and it would map out where all their locations were, and it would say you could drive here and then drive there, and it would literally give driving instructions. And because they innovated with a voice-to-text thing that was kind of new at the point where they could speed dial at the end of the appointment, and it would go to an assistant who wasn't doing anything back at the home office, and she was hoping to help. And because they did all these other things, they could see literally over 23 people a day on average during a stretch day. Just a stretch day. They had nothing else that they would focus on but seeing people. It started at 5 in the morning and stopped by at 5:30 when these guys started to get in, and they wouldn't stop until 7. But they could see 23 people. And they saved about 23 jobs because they did that. What I'm saying here, and because they did that, just stretch days, it innovated the way, and their average now is more like 15 appointments a week versus the 1. But if you do a stretch day, no matter what your business looks like, and do nothing but selling. I remember I did a stretch day one time for myself back in 91, and I saw like 12 or 13 people in a single day. It blew my mind. I remember there was like 6 downtown, all, I had to drive back down a second time, but it changed the way I managed my own productivity. and I could tell you story after story of how. So do a stretch day, a stretch week, a stretch month. I had a client named Don King, not that guy, but in Princeton, Illinois, had $130 million, $120 million ag retail, a bunch of different businesses that help farmers. And we did a little marketing campaign, 3-touch marketing campaign, postcards. So we didn't have to worry about whether they opened the envelope. But it had a picture of Don, a picture of a top customer with some quotes from the depth interviews that I conducted. And we knew for a fact there were tens of millions of dollars of untapped growth potential within the existing customer base, which we realized, and he sold part of the company and literally made like 30 or 40 million, and I made 5%. No, I didn't. But we did that campaign, and there was 2 locations that were going to close, and there were about 200 customers at each location. And do you know, and they did team sales calls, and they would go out in teams. And one of the guys might not necessarily be another sales guy. It could be, Don or other execs or whatever. And they would knock on as many doors as they could during a stretch day, but they had the same kind of, and they would see literally and shake hands and meet with 190 of those 200. The other 10 died or moved. And it saved those locations and took over the other competitors and basically knocked them out of business. But that marketing, the main thing we attributed the success to was the prioritization and listing of the customers and the marketing campaign, the 3-touch marketing campaign with testimonials, dollarization, et cetera. And the team calls, the fact that they were team calls. They could not be out there just trying their best if there was 2 guys doing it together. So there's a benefit to team calls. You improve your credibility, you improve your likelihood of closing the deal. Some people take a whole big team out on a call with clients. So you should maybe consider that as well. Stretch targets. Think about your 5 largest customers ever. Multiply them by a factor of 2 or 3, if that's possible. I've done that exercise many times with clients, and we've even done tenfold. Clients 10 times your biggest client currently. Could we find and win clients that much bigger? Well, let's create a whale list, a target list, a stretch target list, and see what happens. And then boom, sometimes that has doubled the size of companies going after stretch targets. The 320s. The 320s are this. Your top 20 customers, and it doesn't have to be 20, it could be whatever, but it tends to be 20 a lot, so I call them the 320. Your top 20 customers, your top 20 prospects, your top 20 connectors. And here's how you use those lists. So your top 20 customers you're doing depth interviews with, you're cross-selling, you're growing them. And you might use that as references too. You could show people, here are some of our top customers. You know any of these folks, that gives you credibility. Your top 20 prospects, I'll tell you one story about this list. So a commercial real estate broker in Chicago created a list of 50 prospective targets he wanted to, and everybody on his team had to do this. Called me back a year later or so, I was on vacation, I'll never forget. And he said, Mark, that was the most valuable piece of advice I've ever gotten in my career, and I've been in it for 30 years. But that target list and the goal of showing it 5 times a week, just asking, who do you know on this list? That was it. That was all. Most valuable, 6 figures of value to him personally. So that's how you use a prospect or target list. That's how you get connected, is that list of however many that you share with people and ask, who do you know on this list? And so the prospects, and your connectors. Connectors could be your advisors, vendors, your CPA, whatever. You show them your top prospect list. They perhaps could help you get business as well. They're in business with you, they're partners. And then stretch options on your proposals. One of my mentors, Alan Weiss, Dr. Weiss, says, Mark, throw on there the $150,000 consulting option. And just keep doing that and see if occasionally you might sell it. And guess what? I've sold a few of those. And if I didn't ask about the gold option, I would have never gotten it. If I just gave them a binary choice, do you or do you not, I wouldn't have gotten it. So throw in a gold or a platinum, triple platinum option, stretch it, make it bigger. It makes your bronze look a lot cheaper. There's a lot of benefits to that. To wrap up here, I'm going to quickly go through a few things and then ask for questions. But there are 7 areas of objectives, and all my books talk about this. High Growth Levers is really in-depth about strategy, innovation, and culture. And in innovation, we talk about those 7 areas. But in those 7 areas, one of the most important areas is innovation objectives. Do you have innovation objectives? If not, you're missing the second most important area of objectives. But a quick story about innovation has to do with the mom and pop that was about selling pizza, kind of like a Mio's would be in this town, but they only had 3 locations. And they were struggling because who came to town in 1984 in their neck of the woods? Domino's. And Domino's would do a blitzkrieg of advertising, take out full yellow page ads, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the process of innovation is this simple, and they implemented it, and it saved their business. But it's basically coming up with a plethora of ideas and prioritizing which ones might most work, and implementing furiously. So what they did is in between their shifts, between 2:30 and 3:30, they'd have both shifts meet, and they provided free pizza and beer. Sometimes the beer lubricates the innovation process. And they would ask, except for the people coming on to shift, they couldn't drink. But the bottom line was they had to come up with 20 ideas before they could leave the room, and they did a flip chart of ideas, and one of the ideas came from a 16-year-old delivery guy. And he said, where do people go to call when they order a pizza to go? They go to the Yellow Pages. And what we're seeing is that big, huge Yellow Page ad that Domino's. Why don't you have people rip that out and bring it in for a free large pizza from us? And the dad's like, that's a stupid idea. That cost us thousands of dollars the first couple of weeks we do it. That's crazy, but he didn't say anything because there's no bad ideas. He wrote it down. It's fine. Good idea. Thank you. You know, and on he went. Mom that night said, Dad, why not we just do that for a couple of weeks and see what happens? Within 6 weeks, you couldn't find a Yellow Page ad for Domino's at the phone booths. Those were these little boxes that had phones in them. But the bottom line is you can innovate your way. There's another little cute story where a barber shop, the classic barber shop with 3 guys cutting hair for $15 at a haircut. It runs into deep competition from who provides the $8 haircut, Supercuts. Right? And so Supercuts is just right down the block. And they got $6 haircuts on the weekends, and they're just stealing all the business. These guys are going to go out of business. Maybe one guy might be able to stay, but there's no way the 3 of them could stay on. But they did the same thing. Came in an hour early, using a little yellow legal pad, and write down 1 through 20 and come up with 20 ideas and do the same thing the next day for 20 days. 20 days of innovation stretch, 20 times 20. Boom, 4,000 ideas. You're going to find something to do. The bottom, or 400. Bottom line, first one they implemented was they rented and eventually bought the sign on top of their building. And they just put a little picture of a cartoon hand like this, pointing to their front door. And they just wrote these words: we fix $8 haircuts. And that began the repositioning against their competition. So innovation can be simple, but you should also have all these areas of objectives filled out, including cultural, profitability requirements, social responsibility, community impact. You should have 5 or fewer top-level main goals for an organization, but one central growth objective. What's that one area that really pretty much determines whether or not we're highly successful or mediocre in regards to our growth? So central focus. There's a lot of benefit to having a CGO. And then twice a year, because of all this new stuff we're talking about doing in the beginning, you've got to do strategic abandonment. Twice a year, what do we need to stop doing? What businesses, what products, what people, if we didn't have them, didn't offer them, would we not begin to have them on the team or offer them? So strategic abandonment should be done twice a year. I'll wrap up with a little story about Charles Schwab was the first executive to make $1 million a year. Back in 1928, he brought in Ivy League, was the Peter Drucker of the day, the biggest consultant, the biggest name. And Ivy League was super expensive. Lee and Associates were super expensive agency to bring on. But Schwab, was running U.S. Steel, or Bethlehem Steel. And they were a Fortune 100 company at the time. It was a roll-up. He had people like Carnegie and J.P. Morgan behind him. But he brings in Ivy League, and he tells his board, hey, it might be a 2-year engagement, it could be a 6-figure project, this is a big deal. And so he really builds it up, and Lee starts to follow Schwab around for 2 weeks. He's going to shadow him from the beginning of the day to the very end of the day. Gets picked up in a car and then dropped off in the car. At the end of the second day, he's getting dropped off at the hotel, and he says, you know what, Charlie, I'm just going to meet you at the office tomorrow, and don't bother picking me up. And we're going to wrap up the engagement. We're finished. And shuts the door and walks into the hotel, and Schwab's beside himself because he's just been fired by the consultant. And he's told all these people, he was about, 2-year contract, get ready, it's going to be expended 2 days, he's done. What the hell? He couldn't sleep that night hardly. So he gets in, he's all frustrated and agitated. Lee walks in, sits down, says, are you ready? He goes, you mean this is it? He says, yeah, you got a pencil and paper? I'm going to tell you, there's 3 things, just number it, 1, 2, and 3. He says, this is it. He says, yeah, this is going to be it. 1, 2, and 3. Fine, what's number 1? Number 1, every day, make a list of the 6 things that are the 6 most important things you need to get done that day. Do it the night before for the next day, but the 6th, and he throws down the pen. Are you serious? He says, humor me. Let's just finish this. Number 2, number the list in order of priority. Number 3, work through the list in priority, and if you have a fire, literally or figuratively, come up, go put it out, but then come right back to where you left off. So he throws down the pencil and says, okay, Lee, what do you expect me to pay you for this? And he says, nothing yet. Do it for 28 days and send me a check for whatever you think it's worth. So he walks out. And what could Schwab do? He had to do it. He couldn't tell him. He didn't do anything. 28 days later, 1928, Schwab got a check for sent a check for $25,000. That equates to over $600,000 in today's dollars. Schwab would go on to speak well into the 1940s and write that was the most important advice he ever got in his career. It's just as simple as priority management. So with all this stuff we can and should be doing, pick a handful of things. Create your pick 6 the night before. Work through your day in plan, in priority, and knock it out of the ballpark. So with that, guys, thank you very much. I'll stay for questions if you want. And I did bring some books. Growth or Bust, got a bunch of those.